All right, guys, we're going to get started. Thank you very much for joining us for Something News Conversations with. So this is not a podcast. It's not a webinar. It's a conversation with somebody who I think is one of the most interesting people on the planet. So I want to introduce Charlie Engle. He is one of the world's most renowned ultramarathon runners and endurance athletes. His book is Running Man. It is a phenomenal read, and we'll get to this a little bit later. He's been in everything imaginable. He's been on Jay Leno. So God knows how I convinced him to do this, but in a day when we need optimism and resiliency, I'm not sure that I could have picked a better friend to call on than Charlie. So I'm going to let Charlie talk a little bit about his background and his story. We're going to open it up for Q&A. So if you want to ask a question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. But we'll have some time at the end to fire some questions out at Charlie. So it's all yours, Charlie. I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you. Well, thanks everybody for taking the time to connect today. And Scott, I just have to say that Jay Leno's got nothing on you, man. So it was a pleasure to be.
But other than that,
okay, maybe he's got that on you, but that's from a standpoint of approachability, you've got him beaten hands down. So
thank you.
It's interesting. So I spend a lot of time speaking. What I do is I speak, and I am a writer. I was just on a call. I had to scramble to get on this because I was on with my publisher actually, or my agent actually, for publishing, and we're talking about the state of publishing and the fact that I've actually sold more copies of my book on Audible than I have in print. And I think that is it's sort of a symptom, if you will, a good symptom of the fact that people are spending more time listening to things, like listening to shows, listening to podcasts, listening to books. It's no longer just listening to music when you go out for a run. I listen to a lot of books. In fact, this is a good time for me to even start right off by plugging. I'm doing a new little series on my Instagram channel, IGTV, that I call Books on the Run. And so I'm actually doing every Wednesday a book review of a book that I've read or listened to. And so just, 5 or 6 minute little book review. So for people, because people are always asking me what are good books to listen to, and I probably listen to 6 or 8 of them a month. So I listen to a lot of books. I run a lot of miles. So I'm going to back into my story just a little bit. Give you, those of you who don't know anything about me, I'm going to assume that that's a lot of you, if not all of you. And what?
Can I interrupt you for just a second?
Yeah.
So because you're talking on your phone, that's the box that's showing up for people. So for them to be able to see you while you're talking, if you can talk through the app.
I don't know what you're actually saying. If I can talk through the app, all I did was click the join meeting link that I was sent, and so that's what I'm on the phone. Should I try to do it a different way?
I mean,
I think you have to. We have a quick fix for this. If you go up to where it says iPhone, and where if you see Charlie, click on the little 3 dots and click on pin video, and it will actually pin him so he's the big picture on the screen. But you have to click, do you guys all see where he is? Can everybody see that? Thumbs up. Yes, John, I see your thumbs up. Thank you. Jason, Philippe. Okay, awesome. It looks like everybody kind of sees that. So hopefully that helps.
Okay, so I'm not doing it. Everyone else is.
Yes.
Okay.
I think we should be good now.
Got it. Sorry about that. So I continue?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, thanks for that note. You know, my story is I was born in North Carolina. My parents were 18 years old. It was 1962, so I kind of grew up in this hippie household. My mother was a playwright and a activist of pretty much every type. If there was a cause, she was protesting for it or against it. So I grew up with a sign in my hand, basically. And, you know, ultimately I ended up being that guy who was an overachiever in high school, you know, trying to get the attention of my father, which never really happened. My parents were divorced, and I was the guy who was, you know, the captain of the teams and the student body president, and made good grades and all that kind of stuff. Dated a couple of cheerleaders, and then I go to UNC Chapel Hill as a 17-year-old freshman, and like I fully expected there to be a sign out there saying that, you know, welcome Charlie. You know, we're so glad you're here. Our college experience can now begin. And in fact, what I figured out within like a week or 10 days is that I was incredibly average, maybe not even average, possibly below average. And there were 4,000 other freshmen there that were amazing and smart and funny and athletic. And what I figured out really fast, the drinking age was 18 in North Carolina still at that point, in 1980 when I went to school. And I figured out that while I might not have been a standout any longer in many things, I was an All-American, first team, out of this world drinker. And not something that you normally aspire to be, but it became my identity in a sense, my reputation. Like I just could drink more than anybody else. Not a great career path. But I managed to keep things together for a couple of years. Crazy as it is, I went out for the basketball team at UNC Chapel Hill, which also sounds crazy for a 6-foot white guy who can't jump. And I made the JV team, so I had the chance to actually be on the court with guys like Michael Jordan and James Worthy and Sam Perkins for a couple of years in college. And I was continuing this steady slide though with drinking and then eventually cocaine and a lot of really hardcore drug use. And just I don't like to dwell on this part of the story because it's not even all that interesting to me any longer, but it's important that you understand what happened. And that is, I spent basically 10 years, and this is what I consider to be the main thing with addiction, is I spent 10 years after the first time I tried cocaine trying to recreate that first high. And it's part of my belief in life that all of us spend an awful lot of energy trying to recreate first experiences because they're so powerful and they're so deeply ingrained in us. And so whether it's drugs, whether it's sex or a job or a car or just whatever, that feeling that we had when we tried something for the first time is really ingrained in us, and we go to a lot of effort to replicate it, and it's pretty impossible. So I did that with drugs. Flash forward 10 years, I'm sitting on the ground outside of a dumpy little motel room, watching the police go through my car, and you know, I've been awake for 6 days at this point. It's at the end of a 6-day binge, and there's 3 bullet holes in my car, and put there by somebody who was actually shooting, you know, at me. And I'm watching the police dig around in the front of my car, and the policeman pulls out a little glass pipe, and he turns around and he looks at me and he shakes his head in this very condemning way. And I felt ashamed, but I also had this crazy thought, you know, like I looked at him and I thought to myself, so that's where that was, right? I had spent like hours looking for that pipe that I'd hidden from myself. So even in the midst of this this situation where what I should have been saying was, oh my God, I'm in some serious trouble right now. All I could think was, so that's where that was. And I knew that I was in trouble. I knew that this was the time that I finally had to make a decision between living and dying. And, you know, and in fact, I chose running. And that night I went to an AA meeting, and I'd been to meetings before. I'd been to rehab once before. At this point, I'm 29 years old. My first son had just been born a couple months before, and I knew that I had to make a change or I wasn't going to survive. And so I went to a meeting that night, and I got up the next morning and I put on my running shoes, and I did those two things every single day for the next 3 years. I went to a meeting and I ran every day for 3 years without missing a single day. And in that way, I slowly began to change my life and to actually build a life for myself. And that's what it took for me. I mean, in fact, in those 3 years, I ran something like 30 marathons, because obviously I had that whole addiction thing under control. And, you know, I even had friends of mine say, you know, it sounds like you just switched addictions. You know, you went from being a drug addict to a running addict. And it's strange how even the people closest to us can sometimes say things that they might on some level think they're saying are helpful, but what it really is a veiled criticism. And it's odd. So for a while I wondered, had I just switched addictions? But, you know, addiction was all about being invisible and about hiding and having no feelings. And running is the exact opposite. Running's all about being completely present and almost like having a bright spotlight shined on you all the time. And so I knew that I was on the right path. And I also spent those 3 years, like, I think what I was trying to do was like pound the addict out of me. I was trying to like cut that part of me out because I felt like my addict was trying to kill me. And it took those 3 years of intensive meetings and running and really trying to grow as a person to understand that actually the addict is all the best parts of me. Like, my addictive nature is what makes me who I am, and it is actually what makes me good at things. My suspicion is everybody on this call has, well, I actually know for sure, it's not even a suspicion. We all have a relationship to addiction. You either are one, you know one, you got a family member who's an addict and of some sort. And there's also this idea that if you are actually a successful person in business or in other ways, there is an obsessive quality that you have that has allowed you to be successful in the way that you are. And there's balances. I would say balance is extremely overrated because, you know, it's really hard to be balanced when you're in the midst of trying to build a business or start a family or run 100 miles. Doesn't mean you don't find balance or teeter back and forth, but you have to be focused and obsessive and even addicted to a particular goal. So in my case, what I learned was, and my mom taught me this, she's like, well, if you just use your powers for good, so if I point my addiction at positive things, then positive things happen for me. And so that's the basis of sort of what built this this person you're looking at right now. And the addict part of me is still very much alive today and has led me, you know, really around the world. Scott, I don't know if you want to jump in and out, if there's something you want to ask, or if anyone has a question about that part of my story, jump in.
Anybody have a question? I mean, I think your optimism and your resiliency is so topical. And I think, you know, you're going to get into some more of that. So I think that's really what we wanted to focus on.
That's great. Can you guys still see me?
No.
Can you guys?
Yep.
No.
Okay. Sorry. Somebody called on my phone. I'm not smart enough either to figure out how to actually put it on. I am smart enough to figure it out, but I didn't. There we go. So, and Scott, you know a lot of this, but so what happened next is, in good obsessive form, what I began to do was to figure out, like, if I could run a marathon, and I learned all these lessons from running marathons, what kind of lessons could I learn from running 50 miles or 100 miles or hundreds of miles? So I started doing these events in the Amazon jungle and in Vietnam and the Atacama Desert in Chile, and I ran across the Gobi Desert, and I did what I like to call, sort of, I don't know, self-imposed suffering in a way. Because everybody on this call right now, I am certain of one thing. If I was having a direct conversation with you and I asked you, I'll even ask you guys right now, take 5 seconds to think about this. What is the most formative thing that's ever happened to you in your life? What has made you who you are more than any other thing? 5 seconds. Okay. It didn't even take 5 seconds for you to figure out what it was, because you all, and I'm not asking anybody what it was, but I guarantee you this, every one of you chose something in all likelihood that was a struggle, that was a challenge that happened to you. It could be death of a close person to you. It could be losing a job. It could be divorce. It could be whatever, like, because those are the things that actually make us who we are. Even this current, our coronavirus thing, like, part of what I want to talk about today, and I will towards the end, is this idea that this isn't just about surviving something. This is actually trying to find a way to thrive through this and to look at it as an opportunity for growth. You don't just get through a hard time and hope to be the same person you were when you went into the hard time. You would hope that at the end of that hard time, you've actually found a way to be even better and to grow as a person in some way. So that's the challenge I'm going to leave you all with today, later. But this path for me took me to, I mentioned the Amazon. So I'm in the Amazon jungle. I'm doing a race across like 200 miles of the Amazon. And a guy who had never met before says to me, I wonder if anyone's ever run across the Sahara Desert. Like, have you ever thought about running across the Sahara? And I basically just looked at him and told him he was out of his mind. But words said to us by a stranger in passing can actually change the entire course of our lives. Like, we all know this. And what he said to me was like an earworm. And I went home after the race and I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I started doing some research and I found out that, in fact, no one had ever run across the entire Sahara Desert. Go figure, right? And I just started telling people that I was going to be the first person to run across the Sahara with no real, I don't think I had any real evidence or proof that I was capable of it at that point, but I just started to say it. I took possession of it, and people told me, friends, strangers, whoever. I was working as a producer for ABC's Extreme Makeover Home Edition at this point in my life. And I was a senior producer on this show, and I was having a blast. And I just started telling people I was going to be the first person to ever run across the Sahara, and they said it was just impossible. And what I discovered about myself, and maybe it's part of my addictive nature, not maybe, it is part of my addictive nature, is every time somebody told me I couldn't do it, that it was impossible, it was too hot, there was too much sand, you couldn't get resupplied, it was too dangerous, I found myself digging my heels in even harder. Not to prove it to them, but it just hit me in a way that that made me want to try even harder. And let's face it, firsts in the adventure world are really hard to come by. It's very difficult to find something that hasn't been done before. And finally, I got an introduction to a guy named James Mall, and he had won the Academy Award, the Oscar for the best documentary a couple of years before I met him. And I went in and I told him this story. I said, I want to run across the Sahara Desert, and it's going to be hot and it's sandy. It's the world's biggest desert, and there's native Tuaregs, and there's, all these amazing things, this beauty of the Sahara, the starkness. And it was a terrible pitch. Actually, it was the worst pitch I've ever given in my life for anything. And it just goes to show you that your heart and your passion and how you feel about it still comes through, even if your material sucks. And he stood up at the end of that meeting and put out his hand and said, I'll do it. If you go to the Sahara, I want to go there with cameras. And I was blown away. And a week later, he called and said that he just hung up with Matt Damon, and that Matt Damon would like to executive produce and narrate the film. And he asked me if that would be okay with me. And I very deadpan took a few beats. I didn't say anything. And I said to him, I really hoped that we could find somebody better, but that sure, Matt Damon would be just fine. And so to be clear, now I have 2 Academy Award winners attached to a film about me running across sand, the world's biggest sandbox. And, look, if a sponsor or somebody asks me like, hey, are you sure you can actually do this? I'm like, yeah, no doubt. No, I can absolutely do this. But if a friend or a family member asks me, are you sure you can run across the Sahara? I'm like, hell no. I have no idea. How would I know if I can do this? Like, I have no clue. But I needed support, and I believed that if anybody could do it, I could. And so a year later, by the way, Hans Zimmer ends up being on this film. He did the score for the film. So that's 3 Academy Award winners. So a year later, I find myself on the coast of Senegal in West Africa, and I'm surrounded by like 20 people. I have 2 co-runners, a friend from Canada and a friend from Taiwan. And I have a film crew and support team, and everybody's excited, and we're ready to start this journey. And I literally look around at everybody and I think to myself, and this is a little pretender syndrome coming out in me, right? Because I'm a good salesman. I've suckered all of these people into coming to the Sahara Desert with me, and we are all going to die. Like, that is the predominant thing on my mind. and that's how I feel. I mean, I just feel like, this is just this horrible idea, and I've just continued to push forward to it to everyone's detriment. And they believe in me, and I barely believe in myself. So this journey starts across the Sahara, and a week into it, we are completely dead in the water. It's 140 degrees every single day. We've had, my 2 teammates are both on IVs. 2 support people have already quit. We've been lost in sandstorms. We've run out of food and water. I mean, like, this is the worst scenario that I could imagine. It's going to be the shortest big expedition in history. And I recognized something in that struggle at that time that changed everything for me and still changes it for me today. I realized that I had so much pressure on me to be successful. A lot of it, most of it, in fact, self-imposed, but I felt so much responsibility towards all these other people. And I felt like, we had to be successful. So all I was thinking about when we started in Senegal was getting all the way across the desert to the Red Sea in Egypt, because that's the target. And we're taught, focus on the goal, right? The fact of the matter is, what I needed to do, and what I did in fact do, was to turn this back into something like sobriety. And we've all heard the old cliche. Cliches are cliches because they work. One day at a time. And this idea of one day at a time, I realized that I was approaching this expedition all wrong. And so I got up on day 8, and all I thought about on the morning of day 8 was running a marathon before lunch. And that's what I did. And at lunch, I took a break, and I sat down and I ate, and I had a little siesta. And all I thought about when I got up was running a second marathon before dinner. And after that second marathon and dinner, I would lay my little thin foam mat on the sand, and I would stare up at 1 billion stars in the sky because there wasn't an electric light within 500 miles. And I would just give thanks to, you know, my higher power and to the universe for giving me this opportunity to be out there in the desert, you know, suffering and alive. And in that way, slowly but surely, we made our way across the entire Sahara Desert. And by the time I did, in fact, put my feet into the Red Sea, and this idea of only being able, you know, you can only run the miles in front of you. That's the lesson that I learned, and it applies to so much in our lives. Like, the only miles that I could actually control were the ones that I was doing right in that moment. Tomorrow's miles, the next week, the next month's miles are all dependent upon me running today. And that's the lesson that I took away from it. But when it was over, we had run nearly 5,000 miles. I'd run 2 marathons every day for 111 consecutive days without taking a day off, without a single day off. And I only had 2 showers in that whole time too, so be glad you weren't there. The legacy of this run for me personally was about this idea of focusing on what was right in front of me. But and while it was a physical journey, and I just got a question, it's funny, this pops to my mind. Just 2 weeks ago, I was giving a talk when you could still give live talks to an audience, and I talked about this part of my story, and one of the people raised their hands, and the question was, you know, how is it physically possible to run 2 marathons every day for over 100 days? How's that physically possible? And I'd never thought about this answer. I'd never been asked that exact question before. And my answer was, it's not, because it's not physically possible. It's only mentally possible. You know, the only way to do something like that is with the mind, because the body will follow what the mind tells it to do. And the genuine legacy out of that project, though, was Matt Damon and I co-founded something called H2O Africa. And I spent 6 months raising funds, and this was a clean water project for Africa. And I raised about $6 million in several months. And today, H2O Africa is actually known as water.org, and water.org is the world's largest clean water nonprofit. And it all came from, I'm no philanthropist. I like to think I'm a good person that will make choices that help other people whenever that's possible. But I'm typical of, I'm an adventurer. I'm a selfish person in a sense who wants to push myself to the edge and see just how far I can go. So running the Sahara was about a personal challenge, but I was able to attach a larger mission to the project. And again, we passed I think $1.5 billion in funding last year. And this little run across the Sahara, this crazy idea ended up still today changing the lives of millions of people around the world who now have clean water thanks to water.org. And they don't know who I am or what I did, and they don't care. And I don't care. You know, it's just that's the way legacy sort of works. You know, the best possible thing is I got to do what I was passionate about, which was selfish in a sense, in a good way. And I also got to be selfless at the exact same time. But I was doing the same thing. My run across the Sahara created both of those scenarios for me simultaneously. And so that's what I seek today, is to continue to look towards opportunities and projects that fulfill my personal passion while also fulfilling greater needs in the world. Questions?
So Charlie, I'm going to kick it off. So there's physical challenges and there's mental challenges. Do you think one is harder to overcome than the other? or do they really become the same thing?
That's a perfect question, because again, in light of what we're doing right now, in the world, this is a mental challenge. And mental is way more complicated to overcome than physical. Physical challenges, the thought of a physical challenge, probably for everybody on this call, and I'm going to guess that everybody has either run a 5K or maybe a marathon or taken on some physical challenge in your life that you weren't sure about, you weren't sure you could do. But you recognize very quickly when you're into it. And I also want to point this out as I'm saying this. People think sometimes that they can't relate to maybe what I've done physically. It doesn't sound like something that you're capable of doing. And I have no idea, but that's actually so beside the point, because my guess is everybody on this call has launched a business, has started a family, has been through difficult times in a relationship, whatever. It's all relative. These are the same things. And the only way that you can move forward is one step at a time. And the thing that we do to ourselves most often, me included still today, is I project the outcome either based on experience or whatever it might be. But, it doesn't help us to project, because we don't actually know what's going to happen, because in our minds, we will adjust, we will adapt. I say all the time, what happens to us isn't nearly as important as what we choose to do about it. Good and bad things happen to everybody. And just like this thing, we're all probably sequestered in our homes or offices or whatever right now. And there's a lot of fear. And it really is as simple as we have a choice of how we're going to pursue this period of time. If all you want to do is get through it and be the exact same person you were when you came into this difficult time, I don't consider that to be a worthy goal. I think the thing that we need to look to is to find a way to actually thrive in the midst of this kind of chaos. And that can only be accomplished by setting your mind to it first and allowing your body to follow along. Now, where physical goals are concerned, and I'm going to hope that everyone on this call, even if you don't exercise, there's a good opportunity. Right now, it can be just doing, 20 push-ups and sit-ups for 5 minutes in your house and say, okay, as long as I'm in the house, I'm going to do this every day. And finding a way to make sure that you're doing that, or meditation or journaling. Almost everybody here either keeps a journal or wants to, or has said, gosh, I know I could benefit from keeping a journal. Now's a good time. So I realize I got way away from the question you actually asked, Scott, but the mental part of it is the important part, first. And your body can only do what your mind tells it to do, but your mind is tricky, right? Because your mind will tell you can't do things. You can't go run a marathon. You can't go do this other thing. And so our minds do lie to us sometimes, and we fall into the trap of seeing limitations instead of seeing opportunity.
Yep. And we've got some folks on the call that have broken through those barriers. John McCaskill was a Navy SEAL. Wave, John, if you're not following him on social media, his mindfulness content that he's putting out there is incredible. Quinn Ehrlich played 12 years in the NFL. Dan Nasinovich, two-time captain of the University of Michigan hockey team. So we've got some folks that have broken through those barriers. But yeah, it's the mental and the physical. I think the physical challenges, you really overcome physical challenges mentally. It's, you talk about this, or we've talked about this kind of offline, is embracing that suck. That's what you're not having fun until you've hit that wall where you want to quit. Maybe talk about that a little bit. I think that's an interesting thing that you actually strive for.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, gosh, these guys who've accomplished so much in sports and other areas, they understand better than I do even. There's this mentality that, especially when things go wrong early, and I use this analogy a lot, like in a marathon even, you know, you're running a marathon, you've been preparing for it, and suddenly at mile 5, like the thing's barely begun, you know, you've got a twinge in your left calf and it hurts like hell. And you're thinking, you're thinking, because this is just what happened. I can't possibly run 21 more miles with this pain. Like, that's what happens. Our brain is there to protect us. The thing we have to overcome is, you don't have to run 21 more miles with it. You only have to run this mile with it. And experience tells you that if you keep moving and maybe you adjust your stride a little, maybe you need to drink more water, maybe that you adapt, you change things, you do something slightly different, and the situation will change. So in 100 miles, I run 100 milers all the time, and farther than that quite often. And I guess it's this idea of welcoming hardship. Like, I seek hardship not because I'm like a masochist or I'm like so dedicated to suffering. The point is that I know that all the best lessons, the things that I point to in my talks, in my book, the things I point to as being formative, like I was saying earlier, are the hard things that I've faced. So why not take control of that and put myself purposely in a difficult physical situation? Like, when I run 100 miles, I mean, unless something crazy happens, I know I'm not going to die, but I actually know that at some point during that 100 miles, I'm going to want to quit. Because even me, with all the running I've done, I'll get to mile 40 or 60 or 75, and I'm like going, what in the hell was I thinking? Why did I think this is a good idea again? Like, I can't believe I'm here again. But then experience kicks in, and I realize that in all likelihood, what's actually happening is I need hydration, I need food, I need to stop worrying about the fact that I've still got 40 miles to run and get back to focusing on what's right in front of me. I say it again and again. The dread of what's to come paralyzes us so often, you know, and we worry so much about what hasn't happened yet, but like, we're certain that we can't keep doing this thing. Happens in business all the time too. You know, you take your worst day at your company and all of a sudden you're projecting that out to, well, what if this continues to next week and next month and next year? I'll never make it. And it's such a defeating way to look at it, when in fact, the only problem you need to solve is the one right in front of you. That's the problem that is paramount. And so with running 100 miles, I know from experience that when I'm feeling that feeling of, and by the way, so I want to hit that place where I want to quit, and then I want to find the way to get past it, because that's what I'm going to remember. I'm not going to remember, oh, you know, mile 15 was the easiest mile I've ever run. I don't have a single memory in my entire life of running about how easy some race was that I did. Because if it was that easy, then I probably should have run a little bit harder. I'm not saying that I don't do some races just for enjoyment, not for competition, but you know, this idea of seeking comfort is really kind of crazy. It's like, I don't know when, I always make the joke that somewhere in the 50s, somebody invented the electric can opener, because apparently we were just too exhausted to open our own cans anymore. And it's like, all innovation from that point till now has been geared towards making life easier. Why? Like, probably all of us most of us on this call probably have kids, and we say these crazy things like, I just want my kid's life to be easier than I had. Why? You're all successful people. We got to where we are because of the challenges that we face, yet we so often try to eliminate challenges for our kids or for other people that we love. We want to take away those challenges. I'm not saying we don't help, or we don't help guide or maybe knock down the occasional hurdle for someone. But easy never got us anywhere. And it's the challenges that do make the difference. And, you know, I know there's going to continue to be challenges for me that are going to come out of the blue and hit me in the head. Those are ones that I'll hopefully face with the same attitude when they come. But I have the choice to put myself in a position, especially where physical challenges are concerned, to make things difficult for myself, because I trust the fact that I'm going to learn lessons that will be useful to me and hopefully useful to others.
I think John McCaskill has a question.
Yeah, I sure do. Thanks, Scott. Hey, Charlie, John McCaskill here. I actually did watch this film, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago now. It's been a minute, so forgive me if I forget some parts to it. But my question is to motivating a group to go through something that's very difficult. In my time in the teams, you know, I've had to challenge teams to, you know, go through physical challenges, much like you're addressing, and I had a particular way of doing it. But I'm curious how you motivated the other two that were with you to overcome those physical and mental challenges.
Thank you, John. You're very kind, and I actually, it's very interesting to me because people that have seen the film, you know, and I've gone through this for years. Look, I'm not saying that I was always nice to everybody out there, because I had one job, and that was to get people from the start of this thing to the finish. There were times when I yelled a little too much, where my two teammates, and this really is to your question, I had to treat them very differently. Ray, my Canadian friend, you know, quite frankly, he sort of needed to be yelled at. He responded well to that kind of rah pushing motivation. Kevin, my Taiwanese friend, didn't respond to that at all. And in fact, all it did was cause him to shut down completely. So very much like you as a coach, I'm sure you recognize, while you kind of when you're having a team meeting, you kind of have to treat everybody the same in that, but then individually, you know, you have to take the time to treat people differently and according to how they're going to best respond. You know, interestingly, coaches, law enforcement, military, anybody in a position of sort of authority actually really liked sort of who I was in that film. And it wasn't all accurate. I was portrayed a bit as an ass, which is fine. I'm not saying I'm not an ass sometimes, but it was a little over, you know, it was a movie. So, you know, with 500 hours of footage boiled down to 90 minutes, if I yelled at anybody, anytime, I can promise you it was in the movie, because it made it interesting. But so the answer to the question, as far as I see it, and I'd actually be curious back to you what you think, is that, you know, on the whole, I had to treat everyone the same, but I needed to take the time individually and pull people aside and try to nudge them along and get them to be their best possible self individually, because I knew that my sort of overall methodology wasn't going to work for that person. And if my success was dependent upon their success, then I needed to make sure they got to the finish line. And, you know, in a couple of cases, I did nothing but like badger the heck out of people and you know, practically call them names for not wanting to continue. And I recognize that fear, and this would be my question for you, what role does fear play in this? Because I actually know that, you know, my two running partners were afraid. They were afraid of people out in the desert. They were afraid of not being able to do this physically. They became fearful of things. And once fear sort of really becomes your driving force, it's very hard to get past that. So what do you think about that? And how did you motivate your teams? And did you have to take people aside individually?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And I'll address both of those. One, the fear that I think that can be a motivator at times. fear of failure, fear of, being reflected poorly in other people's eyes and their opinion. That can motivate people to attain pretty incredible things sometimes. So, it depends on what they're afraid of. As far as the method that I use, and I think you already kind of broke it down, is that you broke your entire transit across the Sahara into 2 marathons a day for, 111 days. So you broke it down into digestible pieces, and that's how I motivate people to do things that they don't think that they can do. And in going through training, guys, some of the SEAL training that you see on TV, it's the 6 months training. BUDS is what it's called. Some guys get into the BUDS and they think, okay, well, this is 6 months. Well, that's not at all how to look at it. You got to look at it as one day at a time. Sometimes even what we did was we would break it down to, one block of training in between meals. Say, hey, when you wake up in the morning, you just got to make it to breakfast. You just got to make it to lunch. So we break it down into digestible pieces. And the saying that I always use is, hey, how do you eat an elephant? And you eat it one bite at a time, because there's no way, if you look at that entire elephant, you can't think of digesting it all, right? I mean, obviously that's an analogy. I'm not eating any elephants. Maybe you did in the Sahara. But yeah, that's kind of what I use.
Charlie, Ann Kibitsky has a question. Ann is the founder and CEO of the Look for the Good Project, which our last book, Standing O Encore, supported. So, Ann, thank you for everything that you do to make our world a better place.
Thank you. I wrote the question down, so I'm just going to read it. As you have challenged yourself, how has your identity shifted? Because I'm sure, this is impacting how you look at yourself. Are there parts of your identity that you now accept that you didn't before? You were talking about how in the beginning you were thinking like, oh, I shouldn't be an addict. And now you're embracing that addictive quality and just pointing it in a positive direction. So I was thinking like, is there anything else that you now accept about yourself, or anything that you've learned about your identity, and how has that sort of deepened into almost an existential or sort of a spiritual reflective piece? Because I'm sure it's not just mental and physical, it's also emotional and spiritual. When I was 16, I biked across the country, so I can kind of relate a little bit. And I mean, that was enough of a challenge. So that's what it did for me. So I was just thinking, what did it do for you?
Yeah, man, thank you, Ann. That's a great question. I'm curious, actually, before I answer, when I asked you a little while ago to take 5 seconds and think of something that was formative, by chance, was that what you thought of?
Definitely.
Yeah,
that was very hard.
Again, yeah, and you can't, like, the excitement and energy, and you did your research, I'm sure, and like you got these stories and all this kind of stuff, and then you start and you get to day 5 of your bike and your rear end hurts and it's raining and you've had 3 flat tires that day and you're like, what did I get myself into?
Yeah.
And we project those things. And actually John's SEAL analogy is really great too, because I know a ton of those guys too. And if you think about it in terms of, I cannot possibly do what I've done today again tomorrow or for the next week or month or 6 months. It's just such a self-defeating thing. Your question is it's a hard one, because I will also say I still struggle with insecurity, not about being able to do things physically, but about, imposter syndrome to a certain degree. Like, do I really have the right to try to influence other people in a way? And I think the way I approach that is it's sort of from an addiction recovery standpoint, which is, I can't tell you how to be sober, but I can tell you how I got sober. And so I try to frame everything that I do in terms of how I did it. and use this idea of attraction rather than promotion. And it's complicated. Some people want to be coached. Some people want to be told. And once someone asks me specifically for advice, I may very well give it, but I still try to frame that advice in terms that basically start with, here's what happened to me. This thing happened. Here's how I handled it. Here's what I did about it. Here's where I am today in that situation. And rather than starting too many sentences with these two words, you should. Because if I'm starting too many sentences with you should, I've sort of lost sight of the best way to motivate others. And that is to allow them to know me, and to, if they find something, even one little nugget of what I do that they want to emulate, then that's a success as far as I'm concerned. I don't know why this just popped into my head. I don't know. I don't know where my brain is sometimes. But so there was a movie, Eminem. You know, Eminem's great screen thing was 8 Mile years ago. If I don't know, hopefully some of you saw this movie, and I'm not completely talking to myself here, but in that movie, the very last battle, like he's having this rap battle with this other guy, and it's Eminem's turn. He goes first, and like it's going to be this epic clash. And what Eminem does is basically take his 90 seconds, and he dumps out that he lives with his mom, and that she's in a trailer, and a friend of his, you know, slept with his girlfriend, and like all these things about him. He dumped it all out there, and when it was the other guy's turn, he had nothing to say. And I think that for me, what I've learned more than anything for me is I'm afraid of you finding things out about me. And I mean, that's a weird thing. It's buried in my addiction and insecurity, and probably something that happened to me when I was 5 years old or less. Like, that's kind of how we're all built from the ground up. And so my attitude is very much that the more open I am and the more that I share my struggle, because it's one thing, yes, you want to share successes, 100%, because people want to know that this struggle is going to be worth it. But if the only thing being showed is the end result, or, you know, look what I've accomplished and not how I got there, then I've left something out. So I have to always check myself and make sure that I'm sharing the struggle. If you do, like, if you follow me on social media, I don't do a ton, but I find it fascinating that if I post a beautiful photo of me running in some amazing place and I say something that I think is brilliant and inspirational, I'll get a certain number of likes, so to speak. The next day I post something like, man, I woke up feeling terrible today and I'm a little depressed and I'm down and here's what's going on, whatever. And it's a really heartfelt struggle. I'll get 3 times the engagement. So I don't manufacture that, but the point is people engage more with struggle. And so what I've really learned through these years is that the more I share my struggle and even failures, the more successful I am as a mentor, and certainly as a human being. So Charlie, I really appreciate that question.
I don't know if you're available to go a little bit above and beyond the hour. We've got a bunch of questions.
Sure. Yes.
If anyone has to leave, I just want to let you know that Charlie has very generously offered everybody his book. So he'll sign a copy of his book and we'll get it out to you guys. All you need to do is send us your information. You can send that to Kathy. Will send the information out. So if you send her an email, you'll get a copy of Charlie's signed book. So for anybody that has to leave, I know Stacy Feiner has a question, and then I think
you're welcome,
Jason and Brendan and who else? Stacy, you're up. You're on mute, Stace.
I'm going to have to drop out. It's Pierre, but thank you for this. It's been very interesting and appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure, Pierre. Thank you for being here.
You joining us.
Can you hear me now, Scott?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay,
I hear you too.
thank you. Sorry, thank you. Hi, Charlie. This is Stacy
Hey.
Feiner. I hail from Cleveland. It's a bit of a reunion, this phone call. So to those who I have met in New York at the book openings, I say hello again. Charlie, this is a little bit maybe different. You said, focus on the mile ahead. Don't project too much. I've got lots of notes. This is this might cause you to project just a little bit. I am a business psychologist, and I work with a lot of business owners and executives, many of whom are obsessive athletes, in addition to being obsessive business leaders and exceptional in every way. Several of them are in their later part of life, and they cannot run anymore. And it's brought a real sense of sadness and I guess a little bit of deceit, and they're not sure what next they will do. And I'm trying to help them as their coach explore different things. Of course, we've had some successes, but I was just wondering, as an avid runner, obsessive runner yourself, what you might suggest, and maybe have you anticipated it for yourself that you'll need a different sport at some point?
Totally. And I mean, look, what I recognize for me is that I get this physical, release that I need. And so do the people around me, because if I don't have an outlet for, some of this energy, I always make the joke that when I'm running, my normal life is like I have a bunch of marbles bouncing around in my head, like on a roulette wheel, and they're always bouncing. But when I run, every one of those marbles actually finds a little slot, even though I know that's not how a roulette wheel works. And I'm able to then focus, and that thought that I really need to be working on is actually what rises to the top, and it makes me capable of making progress on whatever that idea is. And I think that's the people who are really deeply immersed in running and have used running, yes, to stay physically healthy. I think all of them, I've never met one who doesn't say that it also helps their psyche and it keeps them emotionally and mentally in a better place. It's like a problem-solving time. So, in anticipation of exactly what you're talking about, because my body has been through the wars and I am pretty beaten up. I can still run long distances at this point, much slower than I used to. But I was entered in 10 days from now, I'm supposed to be in Texas riding a 512-mile cycling race. And I've been training for that. And of course, it got canceled yesterday because everything is canceled now. But I have been doing exactly what you're saying. I have started doing hot yoga a couple of days a week. I'm on the bike a couple of days a week. I can still run, so I'm able to mix all of that in. But I do anticipate the day where I may not be able to run, or not to my satisfaction. Like I can't run fast enough any longer to actually, my body breaks down before my ability to run, if you will, actually ends. And so with cycling, for example, I'm able to really push it because I don't have the same pains, the same aches and pains. I can get on the bike for 3 hours and really go after it, get my heart rate up. And it does allow me to achieve the emotional space that I'm looking for, and to get that emotional and mental release that I got, and the endorphin release. I mean, because really that's part of it too, the endorphins that are released. By the way, people always ask about the runner's high, and I've always made the joke that I have no idea what they're talking about, because all my body ever says when I'm running is, please stop. And but it's that endorphin release that takes place when you stop, and that euphoric feeling that a lot of people don't get there. Like, a lot of people don't actually allow themselves to get to that place of getting the euphoria and the endorphin release, because they give up on running or on cycling too soon. there's a discomfort that comes with the first 60 days. If you haven't been exercising for 5 years or 20 years, you don't magically get to start and everything feels fantastic on day one. You've got to earn it like in every other place. So back to your question, what I would suggest is, of course, to encourage approaching the loss of running almost like you would the loss of any relationship, right? You should mourn that. You should appreciate what you had, but then also move on towards finding, if not a replacement, a substitute, something that will in fact allow you some of the same feelings. And I have found very specifically that cycling does that for me. I also kayak and I do hot yoga, and I try to do, new and different things that might make it interesting. But I think whatever it takes to achieve that same sweat and that same, being outside in nature is part of it for me. So being on a bike, even though it's a little dangerous these days with texting drivers, I can still achieve that same thing through cycling. And I've used running and cycling as a way to see the world. I've been to all corners of the planet, and I've done it on my feet or on a bike. And I'm a cultural tourist, if you will. So I think also encouraging them to do the same thing they probably did with running and get out there and see the world, do a bike tour and find ways to find that same endorphin release.
I think I saw Jason Eckert has a question.
Hey, Charlie, Jason, how are you?
Hey, Jason.
Hey, just a question. You mentioned parenting. So for us that, have kids and you growing up, I know some stuff I've wrote down, certainly easy never got us anywhere. So, you don't want to just handle it all for them. You don't want to let them deal with some adversity, of course. But I think resiliency is certainly a great characteristic to have. I know Scott talks a lot about it, of a big thing from a recruiting end. And as you have young kids growing up, I guess from you growing up, besides, your mom saying, hey, point your addiction in a positive way. I guess now a lot of what you're telling us, of course, are great life lessons to talk to our kids about for sure. But what was it from your end that as your parents or mentors that you had, I guess that kind of helped shape the resiliency that you have?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. No, it's a great question. It is, my parents were divorced very early. I was with my mom till I was about 13 and then moved in with my dad. So I went from this my mother was awesome. She passed away a couple of years ago. She was the most amazing person in my life. But we even joked later in life that I was lovingly neglected as a youth. I was an only child, and she was in theater, and I just kind of grew up around a bunch of adults and raising myself for the most part. And so, which is not ideal, but also taught me, it did teach me some lessons on how to sort of get along. But the one, again, I may cross the line between parenting and giving advice and all of that, but I will say what she did for me, which is this most important thing ever. My mother taught me how to think. She never taught me, sorry, I need to say it better. My mother taught me how to think, but not what to think. The most important thing my mom ever did for me, even though she couldn't have been a more liberal human being. And so once I got older, I recognized this, right? But as a kid, I would make the joke about the presidential election in 1972. This is Nixon and McGovern. And, Nixon won, I think, 49 out of 50 states. So it was a landslide and everything else. I'm the sort of long-haired kid. I'm 10 years old. I'm the long-haired, fifth grader. And in North Carolina, we got to vote in the election at school. So you go into the cafeteria and you fill out your little ballot and you vote, and you're walking out of the cafeteria. And very inappropriately, there was a teacher that was asking, so who did you vote for? And you tell them, I think I was the only child in the entire school that voted for McGovern, right? So she took those I voted stickers, she like slapped it on my chest and booted me out of the cafeteria. Anyway, the point was, I asked my mother before that election, who should I vote for? And my mother said, well, that's really up to you. And like, some people think this, and some people believe this, and you're just going to have to make up your own mind. And it was such a powerful lesson for me. Now look, I grew up in this, very liberal household. I did ultimately gravitate towards the candidate, even at that young age, that made the most sense to me as a kid, which I think everyone does. But I do think the mistake very often is there's a difference. I've tried to do it with my own kids who are both in their 20s now, through example, they see my beliefs because I live my beliefs. So they know what I think in general. But I tried never to tell them what they should think or what they should do, because, and I'll even take it to the biggest degree, my older son, he's very open about this. He's 2.5 years clean and sober at this point. So even growing up in a sober household, like, he is who he is, and he was going to try drugs because most kids do, and it scares the crap out of parents. You cannot stop things from happening. You cannot prevent them. All you can do is react and respond and try to be loving and supportive, not enabling. And in addiction recovery, we learn about enabling so much, because you can always rescue your kids time and time again, even from, and I'm not saying don't rescue them from life-threatening situations, but that rescue becomes habitual, and it can actually be more damaging than allowing, your child to go through something difficult. And my son barely survived his addiction, but there came a point where there was nothing I could do. He was like any other drug addict. Like, he was going to have to go through it. And until he reached a point where he was ready to be done with it, there was almost nothing I could do for him, except to continue to tell him, I love you and I am here for you, when you're ready. And so another long answer I gave. I vowed I would stop giving long answers, but the main thing for me was, that my mom taught me how to think. She gave me the tools for how to think for myself, but didn't implant all the things that I should think. And I think that's the greatest gift we can give our kids, is the ability to have a mind of their own.
So I know we're running short on time. We'll have, I guess, one more question, and then we will let Charlie go. But I thank you in advance for all the time that you spent.
Hey, and for everybody, I'm super easy to reach. Like, if there's anything I've said today that anybody wants to talk more about, or, whether it's around running or addiction, or I'm also a plant-based athlete. I'll say that. I haven't even talked about that today, but, so if anybody has questions on that kind of stuff, I'm very easy to access. We have one more?
One more.
Hi, Charlie. This is Lauren King.
Hey, Lauren.
The question that I have is, I think that we're all very familiar with the process of training our bodies to run a 5K, a 10K, a marathon, etc. But less so, at least for me, less familiar in terms of how to train our minds. What mind exercises, if any, helped you in your journey?
Excellent question. And I would say as an adult, considering if that's what I am, as someone who has continued to search for ways to overcome, there was a time in my 30s, not long after I got sober, where I felt invincible, right? I was clean and sober. I was healthy. I was still in my 30s. I was running I could run marathons every single week in less than 3 hours. So I had some speed. I wasn't elite by any measure, but as I began to do longer and longer distances, I really began to slow down, partly because I got older. And what I recognized was I didn't even have to train myself. The running trained me in and of itself. And so what I mean by that is that the hardest thing to do was to take the chance to go enter a 100-miler. Like, because that's a big leap, right? For somebody who's run marathon's 26 miles. So in our minds, 100 miles is going to be 4 times as hard as a marathon. And that's just not the case. But to convince yourself of that is not so easy. So I think the exercise, the simple exercise and more of an act of faith is to take that leap, even though you feel completely unprepared. Accept the fact that it might be a humbling, if not humiliating experience, especially if you're sharing it with other people. But take the risk to know that you're going to learn from it. I mean, look, starting a business or starting a family, those are huge things that, you can't start a family and then, well, I guess some people can, but you can't start a family and then change your mind. Like that's a lifelong commitment when you do, regardless of how things go. Like you're in that forever. The beauty of entering a physical event that you've never done before, like running a marathon if you've never done one, running a 50-miler if you've never done one, or 100, is that I go back to what I said very early in this talk. You only get a chance to do something for the first time once. That's a pretty obvious, self-evident truth. So it's not some brilliant understanding. But we rarely appreciate what we're going through when we go through that first experience. And so if you're a runner and you've always thought, oh man, I would like to do a marathon, but I want to make sure that I've got the right amount of time to train, and I need to get a coach and this and that. My left hip hurts, so I got to fix that. Like, oh my God, it's a million excuses of why we're not going to enter that marathon until all these other things are in place. Imagine if you did that for having kids, right? I mean, if you said, okay, I have to have this much money in the bank, I have to have this job, I have to be in this house, I have to have all these things before I'm going to have kids. Maybe some people are able to do that. The vast majority of people's lives are controlled chaos. And what you end up doing is understanding that you just have to go ahead and start the family, and you learn as you go. So in the case of running a 50-miler, if you've never run one or even a marathon, enter it. Just make the commitment to enter it, because there's such incredible power in hitting that enter button, paying your money, and knowing that you are now committed towards this thing. And it will begin to push you forward by its own momentum. And I think that that's the biggest key, is don't be afraid. What's there to be afraid of? A little bit of physical discomfort, and it will teach lessons that you will take into every other aspect of your life. And so with kids, we need to teach them to do the same things and not be afraid of taking a chance or looking foolish. It's all the best lessons come from those things. I don't know if I answered the question or not.
You did. Thank you.
I answered a question.
Charlie, I cannot thank you enough for joining us. You guys are going to love the book. There's some great stuff in it. Charlie talks a lot about controlling. He can control his effort. He can't necessarily control the outcome. He's got a mantra in there, no big deal. You'll love it. And he said something recently that I think is so apropos for today, is that worry will not change the outcome. So Charlie, I appreciate you being a mentor. I appreciate you being a friend. And I appreciate you sharing your story with everybody. So thanks so much, Charlie. I appreciate it. You're the best.
Thank you.
Thanks,
you.
guys.
So
Stay safe. Wash your hands.
Thanks to all of you. Yeah. And final thing, recognize that you're welcome. What you guys did for me today by allowing me to share was great therapy for me. So I thank all of you also. And you know, you guys do the same for somebody else. It's very empowering to be able to say things out loud. So, and just all I need, send them to Scott. I just need names and addresses, and I'll send out books later this week. So I would love to share with as many of you that are interested.
Thank you. Can you tell us how to contact you? Scott, can you send out your email?
Yeah, so best places to find you on LinkedIn, Instagram. If you don't follow his Instagram stories, he's always moving. So it's.
Well, look, I would even say to everybody who's still on the call, just go to my website, which is just charlieengle.com. And maybe Scott, you can put that out to folks.
Sure.
And I just posted a blog a couple of days ago. I didn't even talk about my latest adventure series from the lowest elevation to the highest on all 7 continents. But you could read about some other bad ideas that I'm doing, painful ones, and you know, and get a sense of my writing too. If you look at a couple of the blogs, and all my social media handles are there, so you can kind of find everything on charlieengle.com. And some of my talks. I've given some big talks, and there's a few of those on there. So a couple of giant segments of my life that I left out of this talk that might surprise some of you, and you'll hopefully find them interesting, though. So it doesn't matter what happens to us; it only matters what we do about it.
Yeah, we'll send the recording to everybody. Definitely go to his website, and then we'll send all of the appropriate, connections to social media. Thanks again, Charlie. Appreciate it.
All right, guys. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Charlie.
Take care. Good luck, everyone.
Thanks.